So what even is a company when you really get down to it? I mean, beyond the brand names and the products we see every day, it's actually one of the most powerful ideas ever invented. It's a legal story, one that has a birth, a life, and yep, even a death. Today, we're going to trace that entire journey, and we'll be using the corporate laws of Bangladesh as our guide.
Let me start by throwing a pretty wild idea at you. What if you could literally create a new person, not a human being, of course, but a legal entity that can own its own property, sign legally binding contracts, and continue to exist long after you're gone? It sounds like something out of science fiction, but that is the magic trick at the heart of every single company.
And there's a legal term for this creation. It's called an artificial person. It's an entity that's brought to life by the law, and it has its own identity, completely separate from its owners. It has something called perpetual succession, which is just a fancy way of saying it can basically live forever. It even gets a common seal, which is like its official legal signature. Now, you might be thinking this whole artificial person thing is just a fun metaphor, but it's so much more than that. It is the absolute bedrock of all corporate law. Everything about how a company works, what it can do, what it can't do, it all flows from this one single powerful concept. Let's unpack what that really means.
So what kind of superpowers does this legal person have? Well, once it's officially registered with the government, or incorporated, it becomes a separate legal entity. This is the big one. It means the company is one person, and the owners, the shareholders, are completely different people. This separation is what gives it that perpetual succession we talked about, so it can outlive its founders. And of course, it can buy, sell, and own property all in its own name.
This separation creates what lawyers love to call the corporate veil. The easiest way to think about it is like a protective shield right between the company and its owners. On one side of the shield, the owner's personal assets, their house, their car, are totally safe. If the company gets into debt, its creditors can only go after the company's money. And on the other side, the company itself is responsible for its own actions, its own debts, and it can even sue or be sued in its own name.
But here's the catch. That shield isn't unbreakable. In some very specific situations, a court can decide to lift the corporate veil and hold the owners personally responsible. This doesn't happen often. It's usually when the company's structure is being used for shady reasons, like committing fraud, illegally dodging taxes, or trying to get out of a legal responsibility. It's basically a judge saying, "Nope, nice try, but that shield is coming down. You are personally on the hook for this."
Okay, so we understand what a company is. But how is this artificial person actually born? Well, that happens through a very formal official process called incorporation.
Creating a company is a pretty clear four-step process. First, you need a unique name, and you have to get name clearance to make sure nobody else is using it. Next, you have to submit all the key founding documents to the government registrar. Then, of course, you've got to pay the registration fees. And finally, you get the golden ticket, the certificate of incorporation. This is, for all intents and purposes, the company's official birth certificate.
Now, of all the paperwork involved, one document stands above all the rest, the Memorandum of Association, or MOA for short. You should think of this as the company's constitution. It is without a doubt the single most important document because it lays out the company's entire identity, what it is, what it's allowed to do, and the absolute limits of its power.
So what's actually written inside this constitution? Well, it's all the fundamental stuff. You've got the company's full name and its official address, and most importantly, it lists the company's objectives. That's a detailed list of everything it's legally permitted to do. It also has to state that the owners have limited liability and declare the maximum amount of share capital the company is authorized to raise.
A brand new company is really just an idea on a piece of paper. To do anything in the real world, it needs fuel, and in the corporate world, that fuel is capital. So let's take a look at how a company gets the resources it needs to actually get up and running. You see, capital isn't just one giant pile of money. There's a kind of hierarchy. It all starts with authorized capital. That's the absolute maximum amount of money the company is legally allowed to raise. From that big pot, it issues a certain portion to potential investors. Then investors subscribe to the amount they want to buy, but the number that really matters is the paid-up capital. That's the actual cash that has been paid by investors and is sitting in the company's bank account. That's the real fuel in the tank.
And where does all this capital come from? It comes from shares. A share is simply the smallest possible unit of ownership in a company. When you buy a share, you're buying a tiny piece of that company. And the money you pay for it becomes a part of its capital, its lifeblood.
All right, so the company is born, and it has fuel in the engine. So
who's actually driving? The owners? The shareholders? They don't actually run the company day to day. That very important job falls to a special group of people.
And that would be the board of directors. The source material we're looking at today describes them perfectly as the eyes, ears, brain, and hands of the company. Think about it. Because the company is an artificial person, it needs real people, actual human beings to make decisions and act for it. The shareholders elect these directors to manage the business, and at the end of the day, the board is the one responsible for the company's success or its failure.
So how are these directors held accountable? Well, it all happens through a regular cycle of meetings. Right after the company gets started, there's a one-time only statutory meeting. Then you have the big one, the annual general meeting, or AGM, which happens every single year to go over the financials and appoint directors. And for anything super urgent that just can't wait for the next AGM, an extraordinary general meeting, or EGM, can be called at any time.
Now, when you're dealing with a company from the outside, there are two really important kind of counterbalancing rules you need to know. The first is called the Doctrine of Constructive Notice. The easiest way to think of it is that the law assumes you've done your homework. Because a company's key documents are public, you can't sign a deal and then later say, "Oh, I had no idea the company wasn't allowed to do that." The law basically says, well, you should have known.
But, and this is a big but, there's a flip side that protects you, the outsider. It's called the Doctrine of Indoor Management. This rule says that while you're expected to know the company's public rules, you are not expected to know anything about its private internal workings. You get to assume that they've followed all their own internal rules correctly. This prevents a company from wiggling out of a deal by claiming, "Oh, sorry, we didn't hold the right internal meeting to approve this." The law says that's their problem, not yours.
A company can theoretically live forever, but of course, many don't. And just like there's a formal process for its birth, there's a clear legal process for its death. So let's move on to the final chapter in our story, Winding Up.
Winding up is a very orderly process. It's designed to end the company's life fairly and cleanly. First, an administrator called a liquidator is appointed to take full control. Their job is to gather up all of the company's assets, sell them off, and then use that money to pay off all the company's debts. If, and that's a big if, there's anything left over, that surplus gets distributed to the owners. And the very final step is called dissolution. That's when the company's name is officially struck from the government register. At that point, the artificial person legally ceases to exist.
So you can really think of the liquidator as the executor of the company's will. Their entire purpose is to manage this final stage, making sure that every creditor gets paid what they're owed and every member gets their fair share of what's left. It's all about bringing the company's story to a clean and organized end.
And that's really the whole story, isn't it? It starts as a simple but incredibly powerful legal idea, this concept of an artificial person. From there, a company is born, it lives its life, it operates in the world, and eventually it can be brought to a formal, structured end. Its entire existence, from that first moment of incorporation to the final act of dissolution, is guided by a clear set of rules.
We've spent all this time talking about how a company acts as a legal person with legal rights and legal obligations, but that leaves us with one last, much bigger question to chew on. If we treat a company like a person in the eyes of the law, what does that mean for its moral responsibilities? Its responsibilities to society, to its employees, and to the planet? Now that is something to think about.